You're standing on a beach. It's 60,000 years ago. The sand is warm under your bare feet. In front of you is the ocean, flat and endless and blue. You can't see anything on the other side. No land, no hills, no smoke. Just water, meeting sky in a straight line. And yet somehow you already know you're going to cross it. Behind you, your whole tribe is loading a raft. Bamboo poles lashed together with vine, a few days of food, some water and gourds, everything you own. You are about to paddle out into open sea, toward a place you have never seen and cannot prove exists. This is not a story about explorers with maps and compasses. This is about ordinary humans, tens of thousands of years ago, doing something that should have been completely impossible. So here's the question: how did ancient humans cross entire oceans? Really stop and think about it for a second. No compass, no sails, at least not at first. No metal, no nails, no written maps. No Coast Guard coming if things went wrong. Just wood, string, muscle, and the stars overhead. And these were not short little hops across a calm river. Some of these crossings were 90 kilometers of deep, open ocean. Water so deep and so wide that most animals never made it across on their own. That is literally why kangaroos live in Australia, and tigers do not. The ocean was a wall. For millions of years, it kept entire species apart. And then, somehow, humans walked right up to that wall and went straight through it. So the question isn't only how they did it, it's why they ever tried in the first place. Here's the thing nobody tells you. This did not happen just once. It happened over and over across a million years by more than one kind of human. It's not one story. It's never one story. There are several layers here. Accidental drownings that turned into discoveries. Rafts that really should not have floated. And one final detail about how they aimed at land they literally could not see. That genuinely gave me chills. So let's go. Let's start with why this was so hard in the first place. Picture the map of Southeast Asia in your head. Today, it's a giant scatter of islands. But during the ice ages, sea levels dropped enormously. Whole regions that are underwater now were dry land back then. Asia stretched out into one massive continent that scientists call Sunda. Australia joined together with New Guinea into another one called Sahul. You could have walked for hundreds of miles across dry ground. But between Sunda and Sahul, there was a gap, a line of deep water that never closed, not even when the seas were at their absolute lowest. Scientists call it the Wallace Line, named after the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace. On one side of that line, you find monkeys, tigers, and elephants. Cross it, and suddenly you're in a world of kangaroos and strange flightless birds. Same rough distance, completely different animals. And the reason is simple. Almost nothing could cross that stretch of water. It was too deep, too wide, too dangerous to swim. It was a natural barrier that had held firm for millions of years. So here's what that actually means. Every single animal in Australia that couldn't swim or fly had to get there some other way. And for a human being standing on that shore, there was really only one option. Get on something that floats and go. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange. We tend to assume boats are a recent invention, maybe a few thousand years old, right? But the first water crossings weren't made by people like you and me at all. In 2025, archaeologists announced stone tools on the island of Sulawesi that are at least 1 million years old. 1 million. Let that number sit for a second. And Sulawesi has always been an island, cut off by sea. So to leave those tools sitting there, somebody had to cross open water to reach it. On the nearby island of Flores, tools show that humans arrived around 1 million years ago as well. On Luzon, up in the Philippines, there are stone tools roughly 700,000 years old. That's 3 different islands, 3 completely separate ocean crossings. And all of them happened long before our species even existed. These weren't Homo sapiens. They were older, more ancient humans. Probably Homo erectus, or close relatives of theirs. Small-brained by our fancy modern standards. No writing, no cities, no metal. And yet, they somehow ended up living on islands they could only possibly have reached by water. Think about that for a second. Somebody was crossing the sea a full 1 million years before. The oldest boat we have ever dug up. And no, they almost certainly weren't swimming. 90 kilometers of open ocean, past sharks and currents, is not a casual afternoon swim for anybody. Something had to carry them, which brings us to the obvious next question. So what on earth did they actually float on? Here's the honest answer. We mostly don't know, because the boats themselves are long gone. Wood rots, string rots, vine rots. After a few thousand years buried in the ground, an entire raft simply vanishes into nothing. What survives instead is stone, tools, and bones on the far side of the water. But we can make some very good guesses. The simplest crossing of all needs no real boat at all. Big storms and tsunamis tear enormous mats of vegetation right off the coastline. Tangled trees, roots, and mud, whole floating islands of green torn loose. An animal caught on one of those can drift out to sea for days. A lot of researchers think the very earliest crossings were exactly this, completely accidental. A few unlucky humans swept out to sea, clinging to a raft of floating debris, and washing up somehow still alive on a brand new shore. Not brave explorers at all, just terrified survivors. But over a long time, that slowly changed. Humans started building things on purpose. And bamboo, it turns out, is basically perfect for the job. It's hollow, it's light, and it floats like a cork. Lash a few big poles together with vine, and you've got a raft that can carry people and supplies across water. Later on came the dugout canoe. You take a single big log, and you burn and scrape out the middle, over and over, until it's a smooth, hollow shell. The oldest boat ever found is a dugout called the Pesse canoe, discovered by accident in the Netherlands. It's about 10,000 years old, carved from a single pine log, and just under 3 meters long. And that right there is the key detail. That is the oldest boat that physically survived. But the crossings we just talked about were happening nearly 1 million years before it. The boats didn't last through time, only the journeys did. And that's the quiet frustration of studying ancient seafaring. The most important tool in the whole story is the one thing that never survives. We're basically reconstructing the invention of the boat from the footprints it left on faraway beaches. Now let's talk about the big one. Around 65,000 years ago, fully modern humans reached Australia. We know this from an incredible site called Majid Baby, way up in the north of the country. Buried down in the sand, there were thousands of tools. Grinding stones, sharpened hatchet heads, lumps of ground-up ochre for making paint. This was clearly not some primitive, desperate little camp. These were skilled, organized, capable people. And to get there at all, they had to cross the Wallace Line, even at the lowest Ice Age sea levels. The shortest possible crossing to Australia was around 80 to 90 kilometers of open ocean. That is a seriously long voyage, out of sight of land for hours. Possibly for days on end. Now here's a genuinely clever problem that scientists actually sat down and worked out. If just 1 or 2 people drift across by pure accident, the colony instantly dies out. You simply need enough people to start a real population. One study calculated that you'd need at least 40 adults arriving to make the settlement actually stick. 40 people. Now that honestly does not sound like an accident to me. That sounds like a plan. It strongly suggests that by 65,000 years ago, humans could deliberately load up their boats, point them straight at the empty horizon, and make that crossing on purpose. Again and again and again. This was the first great sea migration in all of human history. And against every possible odd, it actually worked. And remember, this wasn't just a few young hunters out on a dare. To build a lasting colony, you need women, children, and elders making the crossing too. Whole families climbed onto those rafts and trusted the open sea with everything. Their descendants would go on to live in Australia for the next 65,000 years, unbroken. But wait, how do you even find your way with no compass and no map at all? Here's what nobody ever tells you. The open ocean is not actually blank. To someone who has spent their entire life beside the sea, it is absolutely covered in signs. The stars are the very first map. They rise and set in the same places every single night, wheeling across the sky in a fixed, reliable pattern. Learn them well, and you always know exactly which way you're facing. Then there's the water itself. Ocean swells roll in from steady, predictable directions driven by far-off distant winds. A truly skilled navigator can feel those swells moving through the hull of the boat, even lying flat on their back with their eyes shut. Birds are another huge clue. Many seabirds fly far out to fish in the morning, then turn and head back to land at dusk. Follow them home in the evening, and they lead you straight to the shore. Clouds pile up and hover over hidden islands. The color of the water shifts and changes near the shallows. Even the smell of the air itself gets different as you approach land. And none of this needs any technology at all. It just needs attention, memory, and generations of hard-won knowledge passed down by voice alone. To an untrained eye, the sea is just a flat gray blank. To a trained one, it's practically a printed page. The same ocean that terrifies you would have read like a road sign to them. And they learned to read it as children, long before they ever pushed off from shore. And some humans took this ocean reading skill and pushed it to an absolutely staggering level. Look at the Pacific Islanders. The Lapita people began spreading across the Pacific Ocean around 3,000 years ago. And their descendants, the Polynesians, went on to settle a scattered triangle of islands the size of an entire continent. We're talking Hawaii, New Zealand, and Rapa Nui. Tiny specks of land separated by thousands of kilometers of empty, brutal ocean. And they found them without a compass, without a clock, without a single written chart. They navigated using what's now called wayfinding, holding a map of the stars, the swells, and the winds entirely inside their own heads. Some islanders even made stick charts, little frames of bent sticks and shells that recorded how the ocean swells bend and wrap around islands. Imagine steering a wooden canoe for weeks across open water, aiming for a dot of land smaller than a city, and actually hitting it on purpose. That is not luck. That is one of the most impressive things our species has ever done. And almost nobody talks about it. And here's the humbling part. These were people with no metal, no engines, and no satellites. They read the sky and the water better than most of us ever could with a phone in our hand. The knowledge lived in their heads and their bodies, not in any machine. And here's the bigger thing that happened once humans could reliably cross water. The ocean stopped being a wall. It quietly turned into a road. Look at the Mediterranean around 11,000 years ago. On the small Greek island of Melos, there's a black volcanic glass called obsidian. And obsidian makes unbelievably sharp cutting blades. Archaeologists keep on finding that exact Melos obsidian far away from the island, over on the mainland, in a cave called Franchthi. And the only possible way it got there was by boat, carried across open water. Which means people were sailing out to that island, quarrying the sharp stone, and then sailing all the way back, on purpose, over and over, as a genuine form of trade. On the island of Cyprus, there are clear signs of human visits over 12,000 years ago, long before anyone was even farming, so these clearly weren't one-way accidents anymore. These were round trips. The sea had quietly become a network. Goods, people, and brand new ideas all started moving across the water in a way they simply never could on foot. In a real sense, those first ocean crossings were the very beginning of globalization. Tens of thousands of years before anyone ever wrote a single word down. Now let's be honest for a moment about what we actually don't know. It's very tempting to picture every single ancient crossing as some brave, carefully planned, heroic voyage. But the real truth is a lot messier than that. For the very oldest crossings, the million-year-old ones, most scientists genuinely think they probably were accidents. A tsunami, a sudden flood, a raft of loose debris, and a few humans carried helplessly off against their own will. We have no surviving boats, no drawings, no real way to prove they actually meant to go anywhere. And not everyone who tried it ever made it. For every single raft that reached a brand new shore, there were almost certainly many more that simply didn't. People lost forever at sea, leaving behind absolutely no trace at all. Survivorship is quiet and cruel like that. We only ever find the winners. So the real picture is genuinely a mix. Some of those crossings were pure blind luck. Some of them were hard-earned skill. And somewhere in that long stretch between 1 million and 65,000 years ago, humans quietly crossed a line of their very own. From being carried helplessly by the sea to actually steering their way across it. But here's the part I deliberately saved for the very end. And honestly, it's the wildest one of all. When those ancient humans stood on the shore of Timor, ready to cross the sea to Australia, they faced one truly impossible problem. They could not see where they were going. Australia was simply too far away, hidden completely below the curve of the horizon. From that beach, there was no land at all in sight. Nothing. Just endless water rolling all the way to the edge of the world. So really think hard about what that means. To climb into a boat and paddle out there, you first had to believe in a place you had never seen and could not prove was even real. You had to sail straight toward absolutely nothing. So why on earth would anyone ever do that? Well, here's one genuinely haunting clue. Scientists think they may have actually seen smoke. Australia is a very dry continent, and it burns constantly. Huge bushfires send towering columns of smoke thousands of meters up into the sky, high enough to be seen from far out at sea, from all the way beyond the horizon. So ancient humans, standing on that beach, may have gazed out and seen faint smudges of smoke rising up out of the empty ocean. Something out there was clearly burning, which meant something out there had to be solid land. And somehow that alone was enough for them. Just think about the sheer courage buried in that. You gather up your family, your tools, your children onto a fragile bundle of bamboo. You push off from every single thing you have ever known. And you paddle out toward a faint smear of smoke on an empty horizon, trusting with your whole life that it means solid ground. That is not just survival anymore. That is the first true act of exploration in all of human history. Here's one way to put it. They didn't cross the ocean because they knew what was waiting there. They crossed it because they wondered. So come all the way back to now. You're standing on that beach again, feet in the warm sand. The ocean stretching out endlessly in front of you. Every single instinct in your body says the water is a wall. A hard limit, the end of the whole world. But some ancient, buried part of you actually knows better than that. Because the people you come from once looked at that exact same wall, and they saw a door instead. They floated across it on wood and vine and raw nerve, chasing smoke and stars, tens of thousands of years before the very first map. Every island nation, every coastal city, every person ever born across the sea from their ancestors, all of it quietly started right here, with one person brave enough, or curious enough, to finally push off from the shore. The ocean never actually stopped them. It just gave them somewhere brand new to go. And in a strange way, that same restless spark is still sitting right there inside you. So the next time you stand and look out at the sea, just remember this. It was never the end of the map. It was only ever the beginning.